Every woman who presents to a medical practice and says, I've missed my period, the first thing we do is to determine when was the date of your last period, which gives us an approximate date of confinement. That date is then further qualified by the first scan, which then by a second scan, maybe once they have a clearer view of the organ development, can then give a better idea. So there's a refining of the age of gestation, but it is always a matter here of plus or minus a few days. So every woman who has had a conception will have a date attached to her name in her medical records. That's without exception. Without exception. Secondly, just for point of clarification, you mentioned 5% of the terminations might have a complication. Well, we also get about 1 in 10 pregnancies end in an abortion, just a miscarriage. They have rates of complication as well. These are things like retained product of conception. And this is a normal process where you have the implantation of the placenta, then, and that separates with the loss of the pregnancy. You may get retained products which can cause infection, can cause inflammation, certainly can cause bleeding. And that would certainly be interpreted as a complication. When you say complication, it's not something bad, it's one of those things which happens. Like, for example, you get a boil after a simple injection. It's a complication of an injection. It's not a life-threatening, well, it can be life-threatening, but it's something you'd expect. Every single procedure that we do in medicine has with it a potential for complications. This is the normal aspect of medical life, which is why we're so heavily regulated. When we do things, things can't go wrong. So a normal pregnancy, we even have a measure of development within society of maternal mortality. The greater the maternal mortality, the less well-developed are the health services. So even in well-regulated, well-developed health services, we do have a significant rate of maternal mortality. So this is the normal part of a pregnancy, which is why we need to be very careful about this and dealing with things. The questions around about abortion and death rates happening, this happens throughout normal pregnancy as well. We make a big deal of it, but actually it's just the normal part of life. And this is why we need to have the clinical considerations at all times regarding what are we doing with this woman at this time under these conditions. So the complication rate there may be a bit of a red herring. It is not something to be worried about, but take note that these things can happen. Now, mention was made here about nurse practitioners who do a fantastic job, and I'm very much in support of that. I must tell you also that it's the nurses very often who can put out a hand and stop a doctor from doing something they shouldn't do, because you get some pretty stupid actions. And so by the grace of God, most doctors and nurses held you back from doing something stupid. So we need to work. Indeed so. This is why we need qualifications and people and maintaining your standards here and working as a team where you're respecting each other as part of a team, all doing different jobs but working together. And so the concept here around abortion isn't of any one person making a decision, it's actually the whole team. And then bearing in mind the natural progress of pregnancy against the method here of abortion, each one would have particular problems which might be associated with a particular approach used. For example, mifeprostone to be given intravaginally to stimulate a delivery. You get a normal delivery of a very undeveloped fetus. Okay, but things can still go wrong, which is why it needs to be regulated and why we have such strict controls.